Ladies and gentlemen of the YouTube audience, today you will stand in judgment of the Marcus Patreon pitch. Now you're gonna hear wild stories of early premieres and occasional bonus content, but I'll put it to you that once all of this snake oil is exposed in the uncompromising sunlight of our righteous justice system, you will see this content creator for the heinous charlatan that he is.
Counselor?
Benny. What? Come on, it's time to make your opening statement.
Everything that guy just said is bullshit.
Enjoy the video. In the early morning hours of March 11th, 2017, a 14-year-old girl named Arden Summers opened a window. It was a decision it's safe to say she'll regret for the rest of her life. Though given her age and the heartbreaking situation she was in, it's understandable that she wouldn't have fully anticipated just how grave the consequences would wind up being. Arden's mother Elisa and father Trevor were going through a divorce, and as Arden would succinctly put it 5 years later,
no kid wants their parents to get divorced.
And in many cases, one of the parents doesn't want it either. In this instance, Trevor Summers was that parent. He felt Lisa's moves to end the marriage were premature, and while he had feigned a sort of begrudging acceptance of her decision in recent days, the truth of the matter was he was still nowhere near ready to simply move on and share custody of their 5 children, and desperately wanted one more opportunity to make her listen to reason. At least those were the intentions he conveyed to Arden when he decided to involve his eldest daughter in his plan. She was staying at Elisa's house, along with her 7-year-old sister Bryn and 5-year-old brother Grady, while her other 2 younger brothers, 12-year-old Landon and 3-year-old Cooper, were under Trevor's care. Arden sent messages to Trevor and Landon, who had also been let in on the plot, through a group chat over the course of the evening of March 10th. Providing updates on the movements of her half of the family, and letting her dad know when her mother and 2 younger siblings were asleep, which wound up being around midnight. From there, Arden opened a window to the room of Bryn and Grady, who were sleeping in their mother's room that night. She crawled through, leaving the window open behind her to provide an inconspicuous point of entry for her father, who she crossed paths with on the way to a community centre down the road, where he had parked his Chrysler Pacifica. Arden sat in the car with her brother Landon, who had been brought along for the late-night mission, and awaited further instructions. At 12:50 AM, Trevor sent a message to the group chat that read, "Okay, this might take a little while." And indeed it did. Arden and Landon waited in the car for several hours, while their father claimed to be having an extreme amount of difficulty waking their mother in a way he deemed to be tactful, and by daybreak the pair, having understandably grown impatient, took it upon themselves to drive up to the front of their mother's house. Trevor Summers was seemingly unalarmed by his 14-year-old daughter taking this sort of initiative, as he soon instructed her to come inside, retrieve Bryn and Grady, and take the wheel yet again. Only this time, instead of driving her brother up one road, she was to transport all 3 of her siblings to Trevor's house about 25 minutes away, where she would keep watch over them and her 3-year-old brother Cooper, who had been left alone this entire time, while Trevor continued to attend to Elisa, who he still had unfinished business with. The impressively resourceful Arden again obliged, managing to make the journey without incident with the assistance of the Pacifica's GPS system. There were some more sparse communications from Trevor throughout the day, though nothing that gave his children any clarity on what exactly was happening. At 8:38 PM on the evening of the 11th, he informed his 2 eldest children that they would be rewarded for their patience and assistance, and that both he and their mother would arrive home momentarily. But that did not happen. There's a fair amount of contention around what exactly did happen in the hours before and after that final message from Trevor Summers, and those contentions will make up the bulk of this video. So before getting into all of that, we'll go forward about a day and a half in the timeline to 10:30 AM on Monday, March 13th, when 2 police officers responding to a tip approached a dark blue Saturn Outlook parked in the carport of a private property near Shell Point Marina in Ruskin, Florida, some 30-odd miles from where Trevor Summers last said goodbye to his children. In the front passenger side of the SUV was Trevor Summers, a fresh wound, self-inflicted with a razor blade, running across his neck, but still very much conscious. His estranged wife was soon extracted from the back driver's side of the car. Elisa had a black nylon rope tied around her right arm. Her wrist had recently been slashed open by the same razor blade that Trevor had used to cut his throat, and overall she was about as haggard and rattled as you would expect any woman in her situation to be. But thankfully, she too was not in any mortal peril. So good news. No one dies today. The bad news, however, is that while Elisa Summers was physically as safe and well as one can be in such circumstances, her ordeal was far from over on account of a justice system that sometimes does not move nearly as quickly as we would ideally want it to. In this instance, it would not be until 5 years and a good amount of change later that Trevor Summers would finally be put on trial for his alleged actions, with court proceedings commencing in August of 2022. There are various reasons why things kept getting delayed in those intervening years, but a moment early on in the trial provides a pretty vivid insight into what one of the key causal factors was.
Go ahead and take a 15-minute break. Ma'am, you may step down. Do not discuss your testimony. You will be back on the stand for cross. Yes, sir.
Your Honor.
Yes.
I have been informed by Mr. Summers
Yes.
that he wishes to discharge me as lead counsel.
Okay.
He wishes to exercise his Sixth Amendment right, to represent himself. And I've explained to him that should he choose to do that he may have to do that throughout the remainder of the trial.
That's absolutely correct. Mr. Summers, you have a request of the court, sir?
Yes, Your Honor.
What is it?
I would like to resume self-representation and discharge Mr. Marchese as lead counsel.
And you believe that to be a wise decision?
It's not, at all, in just about any circumstance you could possibly imagine. And you probably already know that, because there's an old adage in the legal world, so often cited when the proposition of self-representation is raised, that it's a contender for the top spot in all-time legal cliches. He who represents himself in court has a fool for a client. The reasons why self-representation is a terrible idea are mostly self-explanatory. It takes about 7 to 9 years once all is said and done to become a licensed attorney in the United States, and most of that time isn't spent playing beer pong. Even just the procedural rules of court take a serious amount of time to learn and acclimate to, and are sure to be profoundly stifling for someone who has not put in those hard yards. But that really is just the beginning. After that, there's seemingly endless case law for your relevant area of practice and jurisdiction to study, and familiarize yourself with to the point that you can cite it at the drop of a hat. Ever seen a lawyer sitting in front of a shelf of books that looks like it came straight from the Library of Babel? They've actually read all that shit. And aside from the academics of it all, there's just the stone-cold experience of trying dozens, often hundreds of cases in the real world that instills a seasoned lawyer with the invaluable instincts for what works and what doesn't, without which anyone opting for self-representation is at an extreme risk of being utterly trampled over by opposing counsel. To put an even finer point still on how universal this rule is, it's said to hold true by just about any legal mind worth their salt, even for licensed attorneys who won't suffer from all the drawbacks we've been over. And the reason for that boils down to personal investment. No matter how well practiced any given attorney may be, they are still human at the end of the day, and if it's their fate on the line, the extra passion that will inevitably lend them will ultimately wind up being more of a liability than an asset, because they won't be able to think in as sober and calculating a manner as another well-practiced lawyer not carrying the personal baggage of being an actual subject of the case. And while just about everyone who so much as entertains the idea of self-representation can be quickly talked out of it after some version of what we've just been through has been explained to them, every once in a while, someone will come along with such a delusional high regard for their own wit and ability that they will disregard all collective wisdom and professional advice, stand in front of a judge, and announce their intention to take the reins.
You believe that to be a wise decision?
Yes, Your Honor, I do.
Are you unhappy with the services of Mr. Marchese?
I'm not unhappy with the services of Mr. Marchese. I do not believe that he fully understands the circumstances surrounding the events, and it would be better if I did the cross-examinations from here on out.
Do you understand specifically that I have permitted you came into this courtroom pro se. We had several discussions. I ruled on motions while you were representing yourself. You then made a decision that I found to be a wise decision to have a trained attorney represent you, and I allowed you to have representation. To now go back, at some point there is a line that has to be drawn, and that the courts allow, the appellate courts allow the trial court to draw. It's not a ping pong back and forth, back and forth.
Judge Christopher Sabella's apparent frustration at this situation is even more understandable than he's making it out to be. As he just mentioned, Trevor Summers actually went into proceedings representing himself, then opted to switch to an attorney before showtime, and is now requesting to go back to pro se after trial proceedings have already commenced. But this is just the latest episode in a pattern of Trevor Summers throwing monkey wrenches into the legal process. His first move was not long after his apprehension, when he filed from jail for full custody of he and Elise's 5 children. Something that was obviously never going to happen, but technically, awaiting trial for serious crimes does not automatically void all prior custody agreements. So he was allowed to make the system go through all of the motions of formally reaching the inevitable conclusion that the kids were better off with their mother, making life more difficult for everyone and kicking his trial date, initially slated for August of that same year, further down the road. Over the course of 2018, Summers' attorney fought to keep a previous incident that we'll get into shortly out of the trial, and shortly after that motion failed, Trevor Summers fired his attorney. And then the one after that, and then the one after that. And then in December of 2019, a couple of months out from a second trial date, he fired yet another one. And then of course, needed a bit more time to get his affairs in order.
I've interviewed 2, and I just wanted to get through today and continue to interview this week. So I intend to hire a new counsel this month.
By November of 2021, there were still kinks in need of ironing out.
Trevor Summers is at it again. He says he's not seeing eye to eye with his latest attorney and wants him kicked off the case.
It's been difficult, as you know, just getting through with the Mr. Marchese's availability. And
now his 5th attorney doesn't want to stick around either. He says the lack of trust and personality conflicts are getting in the way of mounting a strong defense.
I see this train wreck going down the road.
But after firing 4 others, Tampa Judge Mark Kaiser said enough is enough.
Personality disputes are not a basis for withdrawal.
But Summers wasn't done fighting. Now he wants the judge to remove himself from the case, claiming he's biased against him, and therefore he won't get a fair hearing or trial.
And somewhat surprisingly, perhaps out of sheer exhaustion, Judge Kaiser agreed to step aside, handing the case over to Judge Sabella. In terms of representation, however, this time Trevor Summers was stuck with Anthony Marchese. Or rather, Anthony Marchese was stuck with Trevor Summers, until Summers chose to invoke his 6th Amendment right to self-representation. But then again, when Summers reneged on that, which brings us back to where we were with his latest change of heart.
So that's a total of 4. And if I tell you that I am not, if I allow it, that I will not allow you to go back, do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor, I agree with that.
If I discharge Mr. Marchese, I will be discharging him not only as your attorney, but as your standby counsel. Do you understand that? Do you want some time to think about that?
May I speak with Mr. Marchese about that?
Absolutely. Mr. Marchese, you're still representing him, so you have some questions?
I do have some questions. I certainly understand that the point is that if he represents himself, you are not going to allow him to stop and then have counsel come back on.
Absolutely.
But I could talk to him at the breaks and over at night before the next day.
I'll allow it.
It's worth taking a moment to appreciate what a mensch Anthony Marchese is. There is little to no financial gain in him being allowed to stick around at this point. For all we know, he may well lose money from the time spent serving as Summers' unofficial legal consultant. And as you saw moments ago, he even wanted out of this case. But he knows there is a chasm of difference between having a last-minute replacement attorney and no attorney at all. So he still feels a sort of unofficial ethical obligation to give his soon-to-be former client whatever guidance he's able to. What a guy.
Now, I need an answer from you regarding, I have to make a finding, sir, that your request to represent yourself is unequivocal. Do you have any doubt whatsoever, the slightest doubt whatsoever, regarding your decision to represent yourself?
I do not, Your Honor.
You want to represent yourself?
I do, Your Honor. After seeing how it's going, I'm comfortable.
You understand the potential consequences if the jury finds you guilty as charged?
I do, Your Honor.
Punishable by life in prison. You understand that?
I do.
You understand that I am telling you, that Judge Fuson has told you, that it is not a wise, we do not consider it a wise decision. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. I'm going to let you represent yourself.
Thank you.
So now it's time to take a look at the actual charges that Trevor Summers is facing. And if it feels like it's taken a while to get to this point, just imagine how the people actually involved with this case feel. There are 11 counts in total on the table. 2 of attempted first-degree murder, 1 of kidnapping, 2 of sexual battery, 4 of child neglect, 1 of grand theft auto, and 1 of violating a protection order. The attempted murder charges are of course the big ones, especially in Florida where a conviction on either count will result in a life sentence basically by default. A kidnapping conviction is no picnic either, with a penalty of up to 30 years in prison before the possibility of parole. Sexual battery penalties are almost as severe, up to 30 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Because the child neglect charges don't involve great bodily harm, they only carry up to 5 years in prison. Ditto the grand theft auto charge. In a scenario where Summers was convicted of just the lone count of violating a protection order, he would only be looking at up to 1 year in jail and a $1,000 fine, so it's a bit of an afterthought in the grand scheme of things. But what is that charge all about? For that, we'll let Elisa Mathewson, now remarried, fill you in.
How is it that you came to be in contact with the defendant on February 18th of 2017?
He contacted me and wanted to do a marriage settlement agreement. And he was being very nice, was agreeing that the marriage was over, was agreeing to get me a marriage settlement agreement, and asked me to come to his home where he would have a notary. But asked me if I would have sex with him one last time in our marriage.
So is that something that you did agree to?
I did.
What happened after that?
The notary came. We sat with the notary. We had the forms notarized.
What happened next?
He asked me if I would stay and have a drink with him.
And did you do that?
I did.
Did you then leave after that?
I didn't. He said, well, now that we have signed this agreement and it's notarized, it's kind of like we're not married now. Can we have sex again? And I did. And then I said, I really have to get home to the children. And he said, oh, I almost forgot I have something else for you. And we went back inside and I followed him in to the house and followed him into the master bedroom. He normally keeps his safe and things in the closet, so he went into the closet.
Is that closet within the master bedroom?
It is. And he turned into the closet and turned back and pushed me down onto the bed and pulled a knife out from between the mattress and the box spring, and he held a machete at my chest. He told me that he was not okay with the divorce, that he was not going to take this, and that I was going to stay and listen to him. I was held for a few hours and just sat on the bed, stayed still, stayed calm, spoke to him, and that if he let me go, that we would forget about this and that nothing would happen, just let me go. Eventually I was able to talk him down, calm him down, and I got into my car and left.
There appears to be some writing on your bedroom wall. Do you know what that says?
Thanks for being an asshole.
How did that get on your wall?
On February 20th, 2017, I was at work. I came home from work to find my home vandalized. There was writing all over the walls. There was Kool-Aid poured onto my bed. There was trash thrown everywhere around in my home.
Do you know who did that?
My children.
And when you say your children, what children?
Arden and Landon.
And was that done due to them being upset about you reporting their father to the police about a February 18th incident?
Yes.
This little episode provides a window into what some psychologists refer to as parental alienation. Many divorces are marked by some degree of acrimony, even when both parties are more or less good, emotionally stable, let's just say normal people. The obvious reason being that marriages don't generally break up unless the people in it are feeling negatively toward each other to some extent. Likewise, when the couple have children, it is far from unheard of for them to wind up in the middle of the bickering, even after a shared custody arrangement has been agreed to. A classic example would be when one parent all of a sudden finds themselves a lot more easygoing and generous than they have been historically, having the totally unintended effect of casting the other parent as the hard-ass disciplinarian in the eyes of the child. Such behaviour is not by any means ideal, but is unfortunately well within the spectrum of normal, and normal people will typically be able to see with time how those sorts of plays aren't in anyone's best interests, especially those of the child. Parental alienation is a different animal. The turning of the child against the target parent is not done subtly and perhaps even somewhat subconsciously against the alienating parent's usually prevailing better nature. The moves are much more calculated and extreme. The alienating parent will tell the child explicitly that the target parent is the bad one, that they are to blame for everything. Maybe even that they just don't love the child as much as the alienating parent, who's only ever tried to make things work so everyone can be a happy family again. And when the manipulation of the child is more severe, very often the behavior it manifests reflects as much. Rather than just underlying feelings of resentment, you see extreme incidents of acting out, such as the hateful vandalism of Elisa's home. And just as the short-term consequences of parental alienation are an order of magnitude more visible than the quiet turbulence of a normal divorce, the potential for profound long-term psychological damage to the child is also as clear as day. But unlike the normal divorcee, who comes to realize sooner rather than later that relative harmony is far more important than being the favorite, the alienating parent will not be deterred from their approach when its consequences materialize, because said consequences were a part of the plan from the beginning. And it's not necessarily that the psychological damage they could be inflicting on their child never occurs to them, it's just that ultimately they don't really care. Something to keep in mind if you're ever tempted to waste time trying to contemplate what Trevor Summers was thinking when he decided to bring his 14-year-old daughter and 12-year-old son in on his plan to break into their mother's house.
At some point, do you wake up?
Yes. I was woken suddenly from a deep sleep to water droplets on my face, and when I was trying to get my bearings, I realized there was a dark figure in my bedroom. I started to scream, "Who's in my room? Who's in my house?" And then I heard a voice say, "Calm down."
Who did you recognize that voice to belong to?
Trevor Summers.
Were Bryn and Grady still in the bed with you at that time?
Yes. He grabbed my feet and drug me, my full body off of the bed, pulling all the bedding and everything with me. He attacked me in that family room, and I fought to try to get out the front door. I tried kicking him, scratching, poking him in the eyes. I just didn't have the strength, and every time I would get some distance from him and try to reach the door, he would grab a hold of me and throw me over the couch that's there along the hallway side and throw me over the couch. At some point I found my old phone that didn't have any service and dialed 911, and of course I hit send and he grabbed it out of my hand and canceled the call. I kept wrestling with him, trying to get any distance I could from him. I ran to the kitchen to get the house phone, the landline phone from the kitchen, and it had been removed from the wall.
Did the children follow you out of your bedroom?
They did.
When the defendant pulled you out of the room?
They did.
What was their demeanor when they saw this happening to you?
They were in a panic. I heard, "Daddy, don't kill Mommy." Trevor, I'd say, barked at them, yelled at them, "Get back in your mother's bed and don't come out."
Did they come out at any time while you and the defendant were struggling in the family room after that?
No. So either I would be so exhausted or I'd be pinned down in a way that I just couldn't struggle or move, and I would hear a call from the bedroom, "Mommy," and I would answer back, "It's all right, I'm okay." He had tied on his belt loops scarves all the way around his pants, and it made it look like he was wearing like a dress, but it was scarves.
When you say he had scarves on his pants, what color were they?
They were white, pink, and peach.
Were those your scarves?
They were.
And so those were things that you had never transported to your new home on Du Bloom, is that correct?
Correct.
At some point, do you see Arden?
Yes.
And where do you see her?
After a few hours, I was being held in the corner of the family room, and she came through the front door and walked straight back the hallway, back to the master bedroom. And I heard, "Come on, let's go." And I watched as she and Bryn and Grady walked up the hallway and out the front door.
Did you ask the defendant where the children were going?
Yes.
And what did he tell you?
He told me that his parents came to get the kids and and to take them home. And he took me into the master bedroom. He took the scarves and he tied my wrists, tied my ankles, put a sock in my mouth, and wrapped a scarf around my mouth. He pulled a nylon rope from his pocket and cocoon wrapped me in this nylon rope. He, at this point, does remove the sock and the scarf from my mouth. He was going to disappear. He was getting a boat to international water. He had chartered this boat that was going to take him out of the country, basically no papers, no questions asked, and that he would be leaving approximately at 9 a.m. approximately 10 o'clock, he comes in and says there's no more boats running. They only run them at nighttime. I'm going to be here until night comes, and then I'm going to go. He's upset. He missed the boat. He missed the timelines, and now he's got to wait all day here in my house, and I'm feel deflated as well because now I'm in this situation until nighttime. He started to undo all of the things that had me tied to the bed, undo even the scarves, and completely untied me. He started to remove my bottoms and proceeded to have sex with me.
Was that with your consent, that sex?
No.
Did you tell him no?
No.
Did you fight back?
No.
Why is it that you did not tell him no or fight back?
Because I didn't want to get hurt.
It might seem strange to some that the prosecutor in this case is asking Elisa Matthewson questions like, did you tell him no? And did you fight back? Especially given they'll already know her responses will be in the negative. What they're doing is getting ahead of a non-defense. Florida's statutes on sexual battery state consent shall not be deemed or construed to mean the failure by the alleged victim to offer physical resistance to the offender. So Trevor Summers won't be able to offer Elisa's acquiescence as a defense, so long as the state can convince the jury that she was, quote, physically helpless to resist. All the same, it's in the interest of the state to make it clear that the lack of positive resistance on Elisa's part is not something that they have any interest in hiding, as it is not germane to whether or not the jury should convict Trevor Summers of the sexual battery charges.
What happened when the sex was over with?
I was now untied. I was able to get up and put my bottoms on. At this point, he is staying right on top of me, not allowing me to have kind of free range of things. So he is just his body like right up against my body. He tied me for the second time. This time was hog-tied. I was laying on my stomach, and he used the rope that he had brought from his home. He put duct tape over my mouth, and I started struggling because I was having problems breathing because I had some congestion, and I just couldn't breathe out of my nose. And so he removed the duct tape and told me that as long as I was quiet, he would not have to use the duct tape. Shortly after tying me into the hogtie, he used my thumbprint to unlock my iPhone. He told me that I would be left, alone with the kids and everything that was his. And I said something along the lines is, nobody's going to believe any of this. I mean, he just disappears, and we're in the middle of a divorce, and I'm thinking, okay, first person they're going to look at, or that the fact that he came into my house and violated a domestic violence protection order, all of these different things that I'm right now hogtied. Like, nobody's going to believe any of this. He said, I'm going to make a video for you.
And the video Trevor wound up making will make it even more difficult for him to undercut Elisa's narrative. Here's how it came out.
Okay, Art and Landon, I need to give you guys some information, and I want you to make sure you understand this. I spent a lot of time with Mom the last few hours, and the things that she's told you about me being good at manipulation and control and lying is true. And tying her up and woke Lisa up, and I have been holding her against her will since then. It's 20 after 11, yeah. And I did tie her up to keep her from contacting the authorities and giving me enough time to get out of town. She's agreed to give me some time to say bye to the kids and leave. So I am planning on that, as well as leaving her everything that I have, house, car, some funds to take care of the children. And I'll contact her from abroad to make sure she has funds for the children.
So now we have a contemporaneous recording of the accused admitting to binding the complainant, as well as confirming her account that he was making claims of intending to flee the country. On that, however, there is one way the video could help Trevor Summers, and that is speaking of fleeing the country, as well as intending to hand Lisa full custody of the children and provide financial support, implies that he intends for her to be alive when these videos are seen. And attempted murder charges are at their heart all about intent. But the jurors will need to believe he wasn't just saying that for the benefit of Lisa, who was in the room with him at the time of the recording, or that his plans did not change later down the line.
Trevor Summers several times gave me NyQuil to drink.
Would you drink it when he gave it to you?
Yes.
Were you holding the bottle drinking it, or was he pouring it in your mouth?
He was pouring it into my mouth while I was tied. The pain was so incredible, of shooting pain and spasms through my back from being in that position, that I was crying out to him and begging him to please just roll me onto my side. He came in and pushed me over onto my side, still hogtied. He eventually came in and untied me and had sex with me again. And I thought, okay, I've made it through this day. It's almost over. And he told me that once he is out into international water, that my best friend Jennifer would be contacted to come to my home and untie me. But he had to tie me up to make sure that he could get out into international water. He turned on the Netflix series Crown and said, "You'll enjoy this show, just watch this to entertain you until Jennifer comes and unties you." I started to squirm. I started to try to wiggle my way out. And that's when then my bedroom door opened. And I saw the look on Mr. Summers' face and realized he was there to kill me.
Can you describe that look?
It was the most evil, frightening look that I'd ever seen. He put a pillow over my face. He pushed down the pillow on my face, and I'm just moving my head, squirming, trying to get air. And he climbed on top of me with his full body weight, first his upper body, full force on the pillow on my face, and then he actually scooted up his lower body and straddled up on my upper chest area to put even more pressure down on my face. When I lost consciousness, and when I came to, the pillow was on my face, but there was no pressure. And I remember leaning up to try to get some air, like where the pillow comes in, and I just said, "Please." And when I said please, he lifted the pillow off of my face. And he looked at me and he said, "What? Please, what?" And I said, "Please, I'll do whatever you want, please." And he said, "You're going with me." And I said, "Yes, I will go with you."
So you had agreed to go with him. Why did you agree to go with him?
To stay alive. He tied my hands behind my back, and he grabbed my car keys from the hook and walked me to the car, put me into the car, pulled the seatbelt across me, buckled me, and then he got in the driver's seat of my car.
Where ultimately is this stop?
He pulled into the Walgreens.
Is this the Walgreens located in Fish Hawk?
Yes. He took cash from my wallet and said, I need to get you more NyQuil. With my hands tied behind my back, I maneuvered and was able to hit the release to the seatbelt. And then I leaned and used my hands to open the door and push with my body weight and push myself out of the car. I started running away from the store towards the main road and screaming, "Help me, he's going to kill me." He came running through the parking lot, grabbed me, a full force around my body, picked me up and got me back to the car. Once he had pushed me into the car and closed the door, it took so much effort to be able to lean forward and get back out the door that he was able to run around and get into the driver's seat and take off. He took off through all back roads, and then we ended up in the middle of nowhere. He was yelling at me and saying, "Now you don't get to say goodbye to the children. You have messed up everything." He came to the passenger side, pulled me out of the car. My hands are tied behind my back, turned me around and slit my wrist and said, "That's for getting out of the car in the Walgreens." He drove into a secluded area. There were farms, and he turned down this long dirt road, and the dirt road just kept going. And finally it was a clearing with a bulldozer and a big tree, and he parked right under that big tree. My hands are still tied behind my back, and he went to sleep. He had the razor blade. He sat right there on the center console.
Did you sleep at all?
No. I used the back of my shirt to put pressure because I thought I was going to bleed out. And then early morning came, and he came and got me out of the passenger side and took the ropes off of my wrists. He cuts the front of my button-down shirt and uses that as a bandage.
Was there anything that occurred within the car while you were there that day on the 12th?
Yes, he had sex with me twice.
And was that similar to the way it had occurred in your home?
Yes.
Did you give consent for those sexual acts?
No. At night, once all the farm workers had gone, we ended up having to walk around the perimeter of the farm because it was too wet to walk through the farm. And through walking around the perimeter of the farm, there was some outhouses that then had sinks attached to them on the outside for people to wash their hands, and this is where we got water. The morning of March 13th, he drove down through Lakewood Ranch area and came out, and there was a McDonald's, and he stopped before going through the McDonald's drive-through and told me if I alert anyone or do anything that he will slit my throat.
Due to Elisa's testimony running into the evening, court was adjourned and she resumed giving her account the following day.
Where is the next place that you then go?
It's almost across the street. There's a Citgo gas station.
What happened at the Citgo?
Before he even got out of the car, he made me climb through the car and go all the way to the third row. He left the Citgo and said, "We're going to Anna Maria Island to get the boat. We're going to find this safe house." Then he said, "I think it's best if you stay behind for the children. You can get medical attention, and I am going to leave you everything." I was so relieved. I was so thankful. I was so happy. I just said, "Well, if you think that's best, but I think it's really good for the kids, and that way, it'll just be better for the whole situation all the way around." He wrote out a written confession.
Trevor's written confession, like his video confession from earlier, backs up Elisa's claims that he tied her to her bed. Every other specific detail he includes also corresponds with the account she's given on the stand so far. That she agreed to leave her house with him under duress, and that he slashed her wrist after she attempted to make an escape. Also like the video confession, however, there isn't anything that strongly suggests an intention to murder Elisa. In fact, he states he wanted her to leave town with him. But again, also like the video confession, you do need to take into account that he knows Elisa will be privy to the contents of this document, so you can't take it entirely at face value.
So he wrote that out, and then he wrote another letter for the children, and he said it was between him and the kids.
So how did Trevor Summers' intentions come across in a document Elisa is not supposed to be privy to the contents of? In a word, murderous. Although the letter is penned solely by Trevor, it is written as coming from both he and Elisa from beginning to end, and it is unmistakably a suicide note, speaking of them in the past tense, with 4 of the letter's 15 sentences making allusions to them being gone, including that they sacrificed themselves and will be watching the children from heaven. We belabor the obvious a bit here, just to emphasize how difficult the note makes it for Trevor Summers to beat at least the second attempted murder charge. That he wrote it is not in contention. To argue it is not a suicide note is impossible, unless you were to try to make the case it was a joke or insincere for some other inconceivable reason. So the only other avenue left would be to try to sell the idea that Elisa was actually in on the suicide plan, entirely by her own volition no less. One more thing to note about the letter that does not have anything to do with the legal case against Trevor Summers. The one specific thing it really takes ownership of as what they did wrong is going down the road of divorce, something by all accounts Elisa initiated. Even right at what he thought to be the end of the line, gearing up to end this life and cross over to the next, Trevor Summers did not find a level of introspection that involved him being solely or even primarily at fault in any area he cared to name. The letter he wrote for his 5 children to have as the very last thing to remember their parents by still implied everything was their mother's fault.
He told me, okay, now the new plan is you help me find the safe house. We need to look for a green and yellow flag. And we drove around Anna Maria Island, and I looked all around for this yellow and green flag, because once I found this yellow and green flag, and he was going to go onto a boat, and I was going to be able to live my life. I really was kind of excited that now he's going to leave me behind to be with the kids. And then more events happened that made me realize that that was never the case. So he stayed off of the highway, drove up Route 41, came to Shell Point Road in Ruskin. He pulled up behind where Hook's restaurant is. There's a dumpster, and he pulled up behind this dumpster. And I'm in the 3rd row. The whole drive up to Little Harbor, he had me laid down in the 3rd row. He climbs through the car from the driver's seat and said, move to the captain's chair in the 2nd row. I forgot a letter that I need to write to my parents. He had tied me to the captain's chair, and he had tied the rope around my arm here and knotted this, ran the rope around through the back of the chair, basically tying me to the chair, looped through on this arm, the injured arm, and then it came back around. And because of the position of how he tied me, my hands are like this because of the pull of the rope pulling my hands back. So I'm in this position. Rope came from behind me over my head, and because of the position of my hands, it grabbed my hands. And he pulled the rope back and started strangling me. I just was fighting. Luckily, my hand was there, and I was just, with as much as I could, fighting to try to get the rope off from around my neck.
Did the rope touch your neck?
Yes.
Where did it touch your neck?
So it didn't touch right here because my hand was here, but it all up through on the sides.
On the sides of your neck?
Yes. He suddenly stopped and dove into the driver's seat, just threw the whole car over and just got into the driver's seat and peeled out of there. And I start gasping for air, and I'm like, what is going on? And I look back, and I see a black pickup truck behind us. He pulled underneath a house on stilts. He moves from the driver's seat over to the passenger seat, so he's sitting catty corner to me, looking back right at me, and he says, there's an unmarked police car right there. And I didn't believe him. And he began slitting his throat and saying, this is what love is. I'm laying my life down for you. You don't deserve this.
What did you do when he was doing that?
I was screaming. It was very traumatic, and the blood and the whole thing was traumatic. With his neck slit and open, he leaned backwards in the seat with a razor blade at me, and he said, let me cut those ropes off of you. And I took, because it was just looped on my injured arm, it wasn't tied to it, I was able to pull my arm out of the loop, and I had my hands like this, and I said, look, I'm out, you don't have to cut the ropes off. And at this point, law enforcement surrounded the vehicle, my door opened, I was grabbed and taken out.
So that's Elise's side of the story. And though Trevor Summers will not be giving his, as he will ultimately opt not to take the stand, he will get a chance to offer a window into what his side of the story might be via his cross-examination of Elisa.
Good morning, Ms. Matthewson. I'd like to just
Your voice is kind of, that microphone though, I don't know if it can be readjusted where it can amplify your voice.
You probably noticed Summers' soft-speaking voice earlier when he asked to represent himself, and it's a not-so-small example of how the pitfalls of self-representation aren't entirely about academic shortcomings. You don't need to be a natural, rousing public speaker to become an attorney, though it doesn't hurt, but part of your training will involve public speaking basics, including projection. Obviously, you should speak toward a microphone if one is near you, but you should also be able to make your voice reach the other side of a room without yelling, even if one isn't. And that's not just because you want everyone to hear you. If you're too quiet, you appear less confident, and if you're trying to sell a counter-narrative, less confident means more guilty. My client is innocent of this crime is always going to be more effective than my client is innocent of this crime.
Is that better? Okay. Good morning, Ms. Matthewson. I wanted to review the testimony that you gave here today. Excuse me. I'd like to just go through your testimony from the beginning. Do you remember approximately what time I arrived here?
I was asleep.
Do you recall which window I came in?
I was asleep.
And you said that you were woken by water droplets?
Yes.
You said then that your feet were grabbed?
Yes.
And here's a non-verbal issue that creates the same type of problem. You want to have every one of your exhibits as immaculately organized as possible when you present your case, as every unnecessary second spent shuffling paper makes you look less in command, and less in command means more guilty.
Let's start from here.
Actually, you need to push something to turn it to the camera. There's a button on there.
Finding an opportunity to familiarize yourself with any equipment you'll be using is also important for the same reason.
It's on the screen, I believe. Tina, do you know how to do that?
It's hard.
We'll do that. It's above my pay grade. There.
Thank you.
If you want to,
Top.
yep, and focus, it's right there.
Okay. Let's start back with this picture here. Ms. Matthewson, what is this, a photograph of?
That's my kitchen.
This is your kitchen. And, do you see anything out of order, out of place?
No.
Did you have any struggle in the kitchen?
No.
No. Did you have any tea that night?
I don't recall.
Is the tea usually just sitting on the counter?
I would say normally no.
Thank you.
We have no idea what bearing Elisa having or not having tea before bed is supposed to have on the truth of her story. Presumably it has some significance in Trevor's mind, but whether or not he's right about that doesn't matter if the jury isn't able to grasp why it's supposed to be important.
Those things sitting on the countertop there, are they in the same place that they were when you left that evening? When you went to sleep that evening?
I believe so.
Okay. They're not disorganized or thrown around or anything like that?
No.
No? Did you have any struggle near this location?
Near that location.
Publishing A40 set 1?
That's upside down.
Ms. Mathewson, can you tell us what this is a photograph of?
This is my hallway.
Okay. In your testimony, you said that you were brought down this hallway?
Yes.
And you said that was by your ankles?
Yes.
And at the same time, you were kicking
Yes.
while you're being held by your ankles?
Yes.
Okay. Do you notice any claw marks on the walls or any lines on the carpet? Anything that would indicate that kind of a struggle?
No.
This is better. Regardless of whether you think it's significant that areas of the house where Elisa alleges a struggle occurred don't have visible signs of damage or disarray, it's clear that Trevor Summers is trying to convey this undercuts her claims. And given what he has to work with, you can count that as a job well done.
Mrs. Mathewson, can you tell me what is on the sofa there?
That is my work laptop.
Okay. And did you use that at all between March 10th, or March 11th at your house?
No.
No? Did you use it on a regular basis prior to that?
Yes.
Okay. Who purchased that computer for you?
Objection, Judge. Relevance.
I'll sustain its relevance.
An objection on the grounds of relevance is exactly what it sounds like. Federal rules of evidence state that evidence is relevant if it, quote, has any tendency to make a fact more or less probable than it would be without the evidence, and the fact is of consequence in determining the action in question. Like with Elisa having tea before bed, it is not clear how the question of who bought her computer could impact the credibility of her story, and because Judge Sabella sustained the objection, we'll never know for sure where Trevor Summers planned on going with that. Could it really be that he just wanted to get his ex-wife on record acknowledging that he bought generous gifts for her? Wouldn't put it past him, but that's pure speculation.
It was your testimony that you saw scarves wrapped around my body in the living room?
Tied to your belt loops.
So you didn't notice them at any other time until we were in a dark living room?
Yes.
And you could discern in that darkness the colors of peach, pink, and white?
I could not see the colors at that time.
It was your prior testimony that you noticed the colors. You stated the colors.
I know that they are those colors because you used them to tie me up after the struggle, so I know what colors they were.
Okay. Let me ask you, Mrs. Mathewson, do we ever use scarves intimately?
Objection, Judge.
Legal basis.
Your Honor, it goes to...
She can answer the question.
Okay.
Oh.
Elisa Mathewson's apparent surprise at Judge Sabella allowing this question is understandable. The call is not abjectly wrong, however. Florida's rules of evidence for sexual battery state, specific instances of prior consensual sexual activity between the victim and any person other than the offender may not be admitted into evidence. So Elisa Mathewson's sexual history with Trevor Summers could in theory still have probative value. That it actually will in practice might seem like a real stretch, because frankly it is, but given the history of how long it's taken for this case to get to trial, Judge Sabella will want to avoid any grounds for an appeal like the plague, so it's understandable that he's giving Summers an amount of leeway that some might find distasteful now, in the interest of giving him less room to cry foul later.
I do not recall ever using scarves intimately.
In 16 years of marriage, did we ever go beyond just regular intercourse?
Objection, Judge. Relevance.
Hold on, don't respond. I'm going to allow it overruled.
Mr. Matheson, you may answer.
I was a teenager when I began dating you.
I'm sorry, can you answer the question?
I'm answering the question.
Wait. Don't cut her off. But unless you intended to narrow the scope.
I just didn't want to get into the history that she's starting out with. I did want to just ask.
Well, do you have a more specific question?
I asked during our marriage. I didn't ask about her teenage years. She started out with her teenage years. I asked about our marriage. Did we do more than just regular intercourse?
Well, do you have a more specific question than, I mean, that's a broad more than, you have a specific question during the marriage?
Okay, I can be specific. Did we, during our marriage, use peripheral objects in our sexual activity?
More in the early marriage, prior to having 5 children.
Okay. Did we get more adventurous in our sexual habits?
Judge, I'm going to object.
And the legal basis is?
Irrelevance.
Sustained.
Did we ever use scarves or strings or anything to as part of our sexual encounters from time to time?
I don't recall a single instance. I don't recall any.
Okay. But you do recall us using a variety of quote-unquote toys and things of that nature?
Judge, I'm going to object.
Sustained is irrelevant.
Okay. Well, I'll move on.
Finally.
After those videos were made, is it true that we had sex?
After the several hours of being hogtied, you untied me and had sex with me a second time.
So you're saying the first time we had sex was before the videos were made?
Yes.
As a quick refresh, Elisa's testimony on direct was in fact that on the 11th, Trevor had sex with her against her will, once before he made the confession videos and once after. He hasn't picked her up on an inconsistency here.
So it would not be your testimony that I made the videos before we had sex?
I just answered no.
An imperfect answer to a confusing and clumsily worded question. Her testimony is actually yes. They, quote, had sex before the videos were made, and after. What Summers means to ask is if Elisa is maintaining that any and all instances of sex on the 11th happened before the videos were made. Her answer to that question is no.
Okay. So at no point did you offer sex for me to make the video?
No.
Okay.
Well, at least now we know where he was trying to go with this. It's still an ineffective line of questioning, because whether Trevor filmed the videos before or after the sex wouldn't really have any bearing on the plausibility of Elisa offering sex in exchange for him doing so in the first place. Who's to say when it was agreed he would receive payment in such a scenario? He has at least managed to get the notion of he and Elisa making this sort of agreement out there, which is some kind of win.
Did you encourage me to make the video?
No.
Did you request I make that video?
I said that nobody will believe this.
So you said that no one will believe this, but then did you ask me to make the videos?
No.
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 You don't believe, do you believe that the videos would be helpful to you?
Yes, they would be helpful to me.
Do you believe they're helpful to me?
No.
Okay. Well, if you say we had sex before the videos, then let's talk about sex. You simply call it sex in your statements, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did I threaten you to have sex?
You broke into my home in the middle of the night when I was sleeping, attacked me and tied me up. I take that as, yes, you threatened me to have sex with you. Yes.
I'm asking you specifically, before we had sex, did I threaten you or force you to have sex with me?
My answer is yes, you forced me to have sex with you.
Did I hold you down?
No.
Did I push you?
Not at that time of having sex, but prior to having sex, you did push me, you did hold me down, you did tie me up, you did attack me, and you did break into my home when I was sleeping. You raped me.
So you're calling it rape?
It is. That is the definition of rape, to come into someone's home and attack them and tie them up and then have sex with them. That is the definition of rape.
Did you know I was coming to your house?
No! I waited, trying to figure out what to do, how to get free, and then after some time, I started wiggling and trying to get free, and you opened the door, and you came in and you put the pillow over my face with full force.
Okay. In your statement here in this courtroom, you said that the look on my face was of death or of murder.
Evil and hatred.
How do you... I'm sorry, no, I believe your statement was that you knew I was going to kill you when you saw my face. Correct?
Yes.
How did you know what was in my heart? How did you know what was in my mind?
All I saw was an expression of evil and hatred. And at that time, my thought is, he's here to kill me. I'm going to die.
Did I say I was going to kill you?
No.
Did I have the ability to, I don't know, use an alternative method?
Objection, Judge. Speculation.
I will allow you to testify to what he did without speculating that made you believe that he was attempting to kill you.
He placed the pillow over my face with such force until I lost consciousness and had thoughts that I was going to meet Jesus and this was my last breath. That is why I have reasons to believe that you were there to kill me, because I came that close to death.
You say a pillow was put over your face.
Yes.
And you believe that's the only reason someone puts a pillow over someone's face is to kill them?
To kill them to the point, to have them to the point that they lose consciousness? Yes. With that force that was used? Yes.
And do you believe that you've made any contrary statements to that in other proceedings?
No.
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 Okay. But you do agree that it stopped?
It stopped.
Okay. Moving forward.
Next, Summers takes a swing at the kidnapping and grand theft auto charges.
So, now where were the car keys as we were walking out the front door?
They would be where I always place my car keys, hanging on the hook.
Okay. Did you tell me not to take the car?
No.
Did I ask you to take the car?
No.
Do I need to take your car?
No.
No. So it was reasonable that I took the keys and walked out to the car.
It's reasonable that I would let you do that when I was just almost murdered.
When we were married, who drove?
With what?
While we were married, who drove?
You drove.
Pretty much all the time, correct?
Yes.
So, who drove this night?
You drove.
Okay.
Trying to undercut the notion Elisa was coerced into getting into her car with Trevor and letting him take the wheel, by having her acknowledge when they were married he was always the driver, may be the best defense he can come up with, but aside from being incredibly weak, it also runs a risk of painting him as a controlling husband in the minds of the jurors.
And when we stopped at Walgreens, when you said you got out of the car, are you sure your hands were tied?
100% my hands were tied.
So, would you have made any contrary statement to law enforcement?
No.
Would you have said that you pushed the unlock button on the door?
No.
Would you have said that you grabbed the door unlock knob and lifted it up?
I may have, but I used my hands behind my back and used to get the door open.
And you managed to do that without falling out on your back or your head?
I can't recall.
Well, let's think about it. If you're leaning against a door with your hands behind your back and you pull the knob and it opens, how do you prevent yourself from falling on your head?
I can't recall whether I stumbled down, stood back up. I can't recall that. All I know is I got that door open and I got out.
Whether or not this exchange was a win is entirely in the eyes of the beholder. There are no expert witnesses on the feasibility of successfully opening car doors with your hands tied without losing your balance that will be called, so it's really up to the jurors to decide how far-fetched they find the proposition. We don't know what exact model of satin outlook Elisa had, but it seems most of their internal driver's side doors look like this, with the lock and unlock buttons placed here. For what it's worth, we actually tried it in a car with a similar unlock mechanism and door handle. Hands together behind back but not actually bound. Pulled it off without falling over within a few minutes. Not a perfect scientific experiment, but just as a point of reference if you can't be bothered trying it for yourself.
Do you know why I came back out of the store?
Running because you saw me out of the car.
So, you were watching me?
Yes.
At the same time you were doing the other things that you're talking about?
I was tilted. When I looked, before I tried to get out, I looked back and saw you go into the store.
And you saw me run out of the store, as you just said.
I was running away from the store. So I knew you were, I could feel you, hear you coming after me, but I could not see you because I was running the other direction.
Can you explain how you can feel me coming after you?
You use your other senses other than sight.
What senses are they?
You can use the sound of a bigger person running behind you. You can feel just in you that there's somebody approaching. It's along those lines.
And do you remember how we got back to the vehicle?
You grabbed me and forcibly put me back into the vehicle.
Did you ever say in another proceeding that I threw you over my shoulder and threw you back into the car?
I believe I did.
This is a possible misstatement from an earlier account Elisa gave. A clerk at the Walgreens named Randall Crosby actually witnessed her being forcibly put back in the car, which he then quickly reported to the police.
Near the Walgreens and Fish Hawk, some chick just ran out of the dude's car. Looked like her hands were tied. She ran out of the car, she couldn't help me. And he just grabbed her and put her back in the car. Trying to get the license plate. It looks like GLH.
This is what ultimately enabled authorities to track Trevor and Elisa down when they were spotted again on the 13th. While Crosby confirmed Elisa's account in the main, he could not back her up on being flung over Trevor's shoulder before being put back in the car, as seen when he was cross-examined earlier in the trial by Anthony Marchese.
Would you agree that he did not pick her up and throw her over his shoulders to get her back to the car?
Yes.
It's doubtful that this sole discrepancy would be enough to cast reasonable doubt on the kidnapping charge. But when you don't have anything resembling a silver bullet, you need to collect as many small problems with a complainant's statements as you can, in the hope they'll have a cumulative effect on how credible jurors find them to be.
So we leave the Walgreens. So where we parked, you said was under a tree.
Yes.
Correct? Did you make any attempt to flee Saturday night?
No.
Why not?
It was too far for me to run and get help without being captured.
So we drive onto Anna Marie Island, and do you know what the purpose of going on to Anna Marie Island was?
Was for you to find the safe house with the green and yellow flag, because they had boats and they were going to get you out into international waters.
What is a safe house?
That's the term that you continually use throughout the weekend. It was like for, not like drug smugglers, like they smuggle people.
And have I ever been involved with smuggling people, to your knowledge?
I had reasons to believe that you had contacts that could do those types of things.
Now this is actually quite clever, and to understand why, you need to know something the jury doesn't. It turns out Trevor Summers is a bit of a dirtbag even outside of his role as a husband and father. At the time all of this went down, he and a business partner were awaiting trial for fraud charges, having scammed several individuals and businesses out of over $1 million by convincing them to invest in a startup marketing company. Part of their sales pitch was claiming to have patents and infrastructure which were completely non-existent. Bottom line, Trevor Summers had a track record of doing shady things with shady people. But that information wasn't allowed in the trial as it may have biased the jury. Summers is using that to his advantage by putting these wild stories about safe houses and chartered boats Elisa has recalled back to her, and implying if he had said such crazy things there would be no reason for Elisa to believe him. So therefore, her claim that she did believe him makes her story less believable overall. Like Elisa says though, she did have reasons to believe him, because of the sorts of people he was known to associate with. But she can't talk about any of that specifically, so she just has to hope the jury trusts her.
When we drive up 41, where do we go to next?
When you pulled out of Shell Point Road, you turned right to get to the house that was up on stilts.
And you say that a rope was tied around your right arm, around the seat, and then back onto your right arm.
Correct.
Okay. And you did not tie that on your arm?
No.
Okay. So, can you explain how the rope comes around your neck if it's tied around the back of a seat?
You had an additional piece of rope.
Do you know if an additional piece of rope was put into evidence?
I have no idea.
Would you be surprised if it was not?
I would.
You see that photo, Mrs. Mathewson?
Yes.
Does that string look long enough to wrap around the back of a chair, around your arm, back to this arm, and then to then come also around your neck?
That is what occurred.
Okay.
This is, in this video's opinion, far and away the biggest win that Trevor Summers has had. Because clearly he's right, the rope you can see tied to Elise's arm simply isn't long enough to loop around a car seat, let alone loop around a car seat and then strangle someone with. So if an additional piece of rope wasn't recovered from the car, then Elise's account of what resulted in Trevor's second attempted murder charge has a serious problem. It doesn't necessarily mean she's lying, but she must at least have some sort of misconception about exactly what happened in that car, that if not accounted for, could well leave room for reasonable doubt on that particular charge in the mind of a juror.
Miss Mathewson, can you tell me what's in that photograph?
That is my purse.
What else is in that photograph?
A belt?
Did I attempt to tie you up with a belt?
No.
Did I attempt to strangle you with a belt?
It's possible that you tried to strangle me with the rope, and I strangled me with the belt, and I thought it was rope. I don't know.
Proactively presenting the belt as a possible strangulation tool is a serious blunder on Summers' part. He'll go on to argue with Elisa that photos taken of her not long after her rescue don't show marks consistent with a belt or being strangled in general, and she'll make points about glare in the photos and so forth. Beyond that, there will be testimony from various medical professionals about the nature of bruising and how long it can take for certain marks to become visible. The problem with all of this for Trevor Summers isn't so much that it shows he probably just used the belt, it's that it makes things complicated and murky again. If the complainant has a story, and you can demonstrate that their story, as stated, doesn't add up, it's far better to leave that hanging than to introduce brand new possibilities and try to debunk them as well. Because if you're anything less than 100% successful at debunking them, all you've really done is dampened your previous hard-fought win.
Have you ever made a previous recorded statement about our marriage? Stating that sex really didn't mean much to you. It's not a big deal to have sex with me.
Objection, Judge. Relevance?
So ruled.
That means I answer.
I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. Yes.
And in those prior statements, did you also say that you would do that, you would have sex with me just for financial gain or for some gain of your own?
I would have sex with you to keep in your good graces.
So on this weekend where you say I'm promising you money from offshore accounts and all these other wild things, was it the same thing? Did you have sex with me because it didn't matter?
No, I had sex with you so I didn't die. That is what happened this weekend. That is the biggest difference. I was staying alive, and I had sex with you to stay alive.
Okay. Did I ask you to drive me to the hospital after my neck was cut?
No,
Why was I in the passenger seat?
because you went from the driver's seat and you climbed over into the passenger seat so you could turn and look at me while you slit your throat and said crazy speak like, I'm laying my life down for you. You don't deserve this.
Was I mad at you?
Yes, you were furious.
What was I mad about?
That I got out of the car at the Walgreens, that you're getting caught, that all of it.
Did I make a statement about if you're going to tie that rope on you, I'm going to say you tried to kill me?
No.
No.
So here's Trevor Summers' counter-narrative as best we can discern from his cross-examination of Elisa Mathewson. He woke her up in her bedroom in the wee hours of the 11th, after which they had some kind of non-violent interaction for several hours. Sometime after 11 a.m., after all the kids were out of the house, she offered him sex in exchange for him making a video on her phone, wherein he was to issue a false confession to their children and police about tying her up and hatching plans to flee the country. He accepted this deal. Later in the day, she asked to go with him, or agreed to go with him without being coerced. Where exactly she asked or agreed to go with him isn't very clear, because he seems to insinuate he wasn't actually talking about chartered boats, international waters, safe houses and the like. In any event, on their way to wherever, they made a stop at a nearby Walgreens, and while Trevor was inside, Elisa jumped out of the car and made a scene in the parking lot in an attempt to frame him for kidnapping. A clerk witnessed her performance and reported it to the police, unfortunately mistaking her as having her hands tied behind her back. Angered by this, Trevor did in fact slash her wrist in what was admittedly not his best moment. But for the next day, she was camped out in the middle of nowhere, scrounging for water and so forth with him, entirely by her own free will. Then on the 13th, when they noticed the unmarked police car pulling up behind them, she started tying a rope to herself in yet another attempt to frame him, at which point he retaliated by trying to frame her for attempted murder by slashing his throat. The jury didn't buy it. They found Trevor Summers guilty of all 11 charges and he was sentenced to life in prison. On that, a normal note to wrap up on would probably be something to the effect of how it just goes to show that old adage about representing yourself in court still holds true. But that doesn't really work. Not just because Trevor Summers was almost certainly going to lose anyway, but because, as you may have figured out some time ago, winning probably wasn't really the point so much as being able to get in one last fuck you. Being cross-examined is never pleasant, especially in a case like this, but actually being crossed by the person who victimized you? Well, let's just say we would guess those must have been among the worst hours of Elisa's life if they weren't up against such stiff competition. There's no need to worry about her though. She and her new husband Jeff are in a happy marriage and she is now surrounded only by those who love her, including Arden and Landon, long since recovered from the brainwashing of their father. So if the best revenge is a life well lived, then it's Elisa Mathewson who truly gets the last fuck you. Quick quiz. What is a golden rule to live by to boost your chances of staying out of trouble? A. Always ask for a lawyer. B. Never represent yourself in court. Or C. All of the above. If you picked C, then congratulations, you're smart. But with a little help, you could become brilliant. Brilliant.org offers a wide range of interactive courses designed to sharpen your mind in just about any area you could name. They have STEM-related courses like scientific thinking, computer science fundamentals, and math. From the most basic of basics to advanced algebra. They even have subjects as niche as casino probability. But don't go doing anything crazy with the things you might learn there. Now, Brilliant aren't trying to position themselves as an alternative to an actual college degree, because that's not really the point. The benefit of Brilliant is that their courses are fun, bite-sized ways to keep your synapses firing in your area of interest. Whether you're a student or a seasoned professional, taking 10 to 30 minutes a day to run your brain through the right motions is always going to give you a leg up. Think of it as the intellectual equivalent of training for the main event. Take their course on logical thinking, for instance. Sometimes, even if you get an answer right on the first try, you still might learn something from the process of figuring out why it's right. And there's pretty much no one who wouldn't benefit from sharpening a skill like deductive reasoning. But do I get a special offer? Speak up, can't hear you. Do I get a special offer? Yes. To try Brilliant yourself, head to brilliant.org/madorchard, or just click the link in the description to try Brilliant for free and get 20% off their annual premium subscription if you're brilliant enough to be one of the first 200 Mocha subscribers to sign up. How does that sound? A. Quite good. B. Brilliant. Or C. Fair to middling. You're getting pretty good at this.